Hello everybody, welcome to Nature Live Online. I'm your host, Alastair Hendry, and it's great to have you joining us today. If you've been following our shows online, thank you for your support. If this is your first time joining us here on Nature Live, let me tell you what it's all about. These live shows are an opportunity for you to meet and ask questions to some of our scientists that work behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum in London. Each week, we invite different speakers to come and talk about their work and research and to answer my questions, but also yours as well. So during today's show, if you'd like to ask us a question, please type them in the chat box and I'll do my best to get through as many of the best questions as we can today. And if you're enjoying the show today and want to support the work of the museum, please consider making a small donation. The museum has been losing vital income this year, in a very challenging year for all of us, and any donation of any size is gratefully received. And you can find the button next to the chat box on YouTube, or you can head to nhm.ac.uk/donate. Thank you very much for any donation. It's always appreciated. Now, today's topic is one from the history books. We're going to be looking back at some work by Charles Darwin. Of all things, we're going to be looking at the humble domestic chicken. Darwin was known to get obsessively interested in very specific things, and one of the things he became fascinated by was the origin of these common domesticated birds. Why was he so interested in them? What did they tell him? Well, here today to take us on a journey back in time is Senior Curator of Birds at the museum, Hein Van Grouw. Thank you so much, Hein, for joining us today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you here. Before we dive into the topic and find out a bit more about this, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at the museum as a curator of birds?
Yeah, playing with dead birds, I would say. Now, as a curator, and I'm not the only bird curator. The museum has 5 bird curators, and 2 of them are responsible for the skin collection, the study skin collection, and I'm one of the 2. So yeah, you look after the collection, make sure it's all tip-top. You help visitors. We don't have visitors for the last year now, obviously, with the pandemic. But this collection is the most heavily used scientific collection used in the world. And you do some research if you have time for that. And to be honest, this pandemic was, although sadly enough, yeah, no visitors for the collection, no research done by external researchers, but at least we had a bit more time to look into our own specimens. But yeah, as a curator, in general, you look after the museum's collections or part of the museum's collection.
I always think that your curators they're a bit like librarians, but instead of looking after books, you're looking after, in your case, lots of different bird specimens in all their different forms. And
in fact, it's exactly the same. The collection is a big archive of information, and okay, the information is in the form of a dead bird, often even the information on the label on his leg, where it was caught, when it was caught, is just as important, or sometimes even more important than the specimen itself. But yeah, it's a big archive of information.
Excellent. Well, and that archive has been really useful for you in untangling the mystery and the story that we're going to talk about today about Darwin and his chickens. Now, most people, I'm sure, watching will be very familiar with Charles Darwin. He's perhaps one of the most famous biologists in history. But for those that would like a reminder, tell us a little bit about what Darwin did. What was the significance of his famous theory on evolution through natural selection?
Yeah, what he did lots of things. But let's say it in only a few words. Darwin was the man who finally published the idea about natural selection and evolution. He was almost too late, because another guy, Wallace, probably just as well known, at least he should be just as well known, but often in the shadow of Darwin, came to the same conclusions in a different way. Darwin experimented lots at home. And asking other people while Wallace was traveling the world, especially in Asia, and saw things happening. But yeah, the whole idea that evolution, that species could change instead of being a god who has created everything, because of course, yeah, that was shocking. So for that reason, Darwin for a long time did not dare to publish. And when he finally got a letter from Wallace with the ideas, oh, dear doctor, dear Mr. Darwin, while I was ill and had high fever, I had a dream, and I think this is how evolution works. Darwin almost got a heart attack because it was his idea. This then unknown young man almost spoiled it and ran away with it. Anyway, they had a publication together, very short publication. And then Darwin, in a rush, absolutely in a rush, wrote his Origin of Species. But yeah, Darwin is the man who invited, I would say, evolution.
Yes, and he's the name that we all recognize and associate with that idea that not only could things change, but that they different things could share a common ancestor from the past. And that was really central to this story that really that Darwin became quite obsessed with when it came to chickens. Now there's two terms that we're going to be using today related to evolution: monophyletic and polyphyletic. Could you talk us through what those mean and how that is represented in the birds that we're going to look at today?
Yes, we will try to avoid those terms as much as possible, to be honest. But indeed, monophyletic would mean coming from one ancestor, and polyphyletic would mean coming from more ancestors. The photo you see now is red jungle fowl. It's a wild species, widespread in Asia, and red jungle fowl is considered to be the wild ancestor of all domesticated chickens, and there is rather a diversity in those chickens. And the fact that from this, call it humble, pheasant-like chicken, wild chicken, all the diversity was possible, was for Darwin. If you can go with next slide, then we can see that this is the common chicken, as everybody knows it, and might not be that different. But if you look at the next one, for example, the naked neck. So by mutation, it doesn't grow feathers in his neck.
Oh yes, you can see it's got a kind of long pink neck.
Indeed, and might be handy for certain purposes. I won't go into that now. The next photo, please. A chicken's always kept for fancy purpose with a really long tail that drags over the ground. The next, please. Japanese bantam. Oh, there he lost his comb. But anyway, a tiny chicken breed with very short legs, like a dachshund, also kept for fancy purpose only. And the next one, please. Frizzle fowl, yes, with funny curly feathers. This is very liked by children, and because they look very cuddly, obviously. But yeah, frizzled fowl. The next one, please. Silky fowl. Most people do know silky fowl. Dark skin, fluffy feathers. But it doesn't look at all as red jungle fowl, obviously. And still, red jungle fowl is the ancestor. And then the next slide, please. This one will come back later, the Araucana, but it is a breed, but genetically it doesn't have a tail. But as I said, we come back to that later. And if you go to the next slide to explain monophyletic, as you can see on the little diagram, the diversity on top comes from one point, from one ancestor, while polyphyletic would mean that the diversity at the end comes from several ancestors. We will talk only about monophyletic because that's what Darwin wanted to see, and he was correct finally. But other people did throw a spanner in the wheel sometimes, so that it looked as if chickens were polyphyletic. But yeah, as you will see later, Darwin finally managed to find out and found the evidence that it was monophyletic, what was important for his whole theory.
You can kind of sort of sympathize almost with how easy it would be to think that all those chickens that we just saw, some of them are so different. Some of them barely even look like what we would think a chicken would look like. And you think, oh, you know, the idea that they may come from different ancestors initially seems quite plausible. So you can almost see the hill that Darwin had to climb in terms of trying to prove that no, actually they all came from, they can all be traced back to the same the same species. And of course, it's important to put into context that, you know, nowadays we've got knowledge of DNA and genetics, and we can do this kind of work much more easily. But of course, Darwin didn't have any knowledge of that, did he?
Absolutely not. Genetics, indeed, I don't say it's a wonderful thing, but yeah, what we know nowadays, Darwin did not know. There were two ideas really about how characteristics from parents went to the offspring. The ideas from Lamarck, it's all acquired from the environment. So if you live long enough in swamps, you get webbed feet. And there was the blending idea that characteristics from both parents will blend into the offspring, and they get something that is in between. It both didn't work for Darwin and his ideas, so he invented his own pangenesis, what he called it, pangenesis, what was more or less a mix. And then still it didn't really work, but he didn't know any better. But it's a bit of a shame, because he could have known really, because at the same time, somewhere in Eastern Europe, a monk was blowing away on his little bit of soil next to the monkery. Mendel, we all know Mendel. Can we see a picture of Mendel? We have a lovely, it's in fact the only picture really available of him.
Yeah, he wasn't photographed.
Yeah, but yeah, Mendel, I won't go into the history, although Mendel is my hero, so he's not Darwin, it's Mendel, but I won't go into his history. But yeah, he had some ideas how it could work with genetics, with inheritance. And so for years he experimented with pea plants. He fertilized them himself, because normally pea plants self-fertilizing, so he had to make sure that the right pollen went into the right plant. Anyway, after years and years, he came to certain conclusions who are absolutely correct. Unfortunately, the world was not ready for him, and nobody absolutely understood what he was talking about. His publication he sent worldwide round. He sent it to Darwin as well. Whether Darwin could read German or not, I'm not quite sure. If he had wanted, I'm sure somebody could translate it for him. But even the reprint, because you know in those days reprints, you had to cut them open, so it was folded paper, and you had to cut the edges, otherwise you couldn't open it. The copy Mendel sent to Darwin was never ever opened to Darwin. The knowledge was there. He could have, I mean, if Darwin and Mendel had spent an evening in the pub, the world would have looked completely different, I reckon.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those like what ifs. I think is incredible. Like if Darwin had read that paper that was there in his house, if he'd accessed that, would that have completely changed his thinking, and where would we be in terms of genetic science now, perhaps, and our knowledge of that? Maybe we would be further along that path because the dots would have been connected much sooner.
Anyway,
it's a wonderful thing. We'll never know, but it's a great thing to speculate on. So Darwin, of course, he's working in this pre-genetics world. He doesn't know about Mendel's work. He's trying to figure out the ancestry of all these chickens. But it wasn't just chickens. That he was interested in a lot of domesticated animals, wasn't he? Why was that?
Now, in principle, there is a red jungle fowl again. So yeah, we talk about chickens, so that's why we showed this one. But in principle, he was of the opinion that most domesticated animals, whether they are pigeons or ducks or chickens, canaries, dogs, he thought that they all came, apart from the dogs, by the way, from a single ancestor. He did not only think that, but he wished it as well, because if that was true, that would mean that a single species has such a genetic diversity in it and can be changed, in this case by unnatural selection, by selection by humans, into something completely different. If that is possible with a species in captivity, then it should be possible with a species in the wild. And obviously evolution is all based on tiny changes in individuals. For that reason, they're a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, a little bit nicer in color, all sorts of little difference, mutations. What the whole evolution is based on, in simple words. So yeah, using domesticated animals and artificial selection as an analogy for natural selection, that was the main part of his work, and try to, and the reason why I wanted to prove that, for example, chickens, if you go to the next photo, that something like this could come by selection. So genetically, it has the possibilities from the red jungle fowl. So yeah, again, for that reason, he wanted to show that they came from a single ancestor.
So for him, it was very much about almost like these domesticated animals allow me to see my theory in action, almost like happening on a shorter time scale. So you can see his sort of vested interest. And why was chickens of particular interest? Because I have to admit, I'd never known that Darwin was sort of interested in that. I'd heard he was interested in things like pigeons and stuff, but
yes,
not.
I don't say it was particular in
this.
chickens, but of course they were easy to hand. They were everywhere. They were easy to breed. But as you said, everybody knows about the pigeons. But his experiments, crossing experiments with chickens, was probably just as important to him and at the same scale as he did with pigeons. People often think that he bred pigeons for years and years. No, he didn't, only a couple of years, and even not that much. What he did with the chickens, and it was in fact the same with pigeons, he had several breeds, extreme breeds, like this, for example, a Polish. He crossed them together, and the offspring he crossed together again. And then among the second generation, there occurred chickens who looked very much like red junglefowl again. Reversing back to the wild, he called it, atavism. And that was apart from all his correspondence all over the world with people to find answers. And that was also an answer for him that, you see, they come from the same ancestor, because if you cross all those extreme things, it finally goes back to the original. And so yeah, I don't say that chickens were particular of interest for him, domesticated animals in general, but chickens is easy to breed.
Yes, and quite accessible, I guess, as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. Fantastic. Now, guys, if you do have any questions you want to ask Hein, please do send them in, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. If you have anything you want to know about chickens and Darwin, I think Hein's your man. He's very, very knowledgeable on this topic. Now, there's a character central to this story that really his work was proving tricky for Darwin to overcome, and that was a man called Conrad Jacob Temminck. Can you tell us a bit about him? Because he may not be well known to a lot of people, but he was quite prolific in the world of ornithology, wasn't he?
He was indeed. Yeah, Temminck. I often say as a joke, he was my former boss. No, he was the first director of the Natural History Museum in the Netherlands, and I did start my career, if you call this a career, at the Natural History Museum in the Netherlands. So yeah, Temminck, he was a famous ornithologist in his days, even before the museum was founded. The museum was founded in 1820 in the Netherlands by the government. Temminck was already known then as an ornithologist, had a large private collection. That's probably why the government asked him to be the first director. There are two theories about it. The government wanted his collection, and Temminck said, "That's all right, but I will be the director." Or the other theory is, "Oh, Mr. Temminck, do you want to be the director of a new museum?" "Oh, yes, that is great. Shall I give you my collection?" That's the nicer version, so let's go with that. Temminck, as being an important ornithologist, and in those days there was still lots to discover. And I said before, there is not much communication either, and lots of knowledge we have now was not known then. So if he got something new he had never seen before, because he got birds sent from all over the world. You can go to the next slide, for example. Yes, he got from Ceylon, nowadays Sri Lanka, from the governor, and sent him a few specimens. And we come back to those specimens later. But that was a jungle fowl from the wild with no tail. Now, that was never seen before. Domesticated fowl with no tail was known, but this must be something new. So according to Temminck, this was a new species. So he described it. And it was known for a while in the literature, in the ornithological world, as being, a species. But was not very convenient for Darwin, as turned out later. Can we go to the next photo? Yes, another new species Temminck described. He only got a foot. He got a foot from Indonesia, from Batavia, on the left. An enormous, large chicken foot. And based on that, he had decided that it must have come from a gigantic jungle fowl, probably the ancestor of all the big, large fighting cocks kept in those days. But this must have been a wild species, so a Gallus giganticus. So he described that as a new wild species. Nowadays, we know, if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, this is Ceylon jungle fowl with tail. The funny thing is, when Temminck described his tailless jungle fowl, the real species was even not discovered yet. But now we know that Temminck's birds, what he described, was nothing else than a Sri Lankan silent jungle fowl, but with a mutation. For that reason, it had a tail. The next slide, I think, is the specimen in Paris, what it is named after. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, and his Gallus giganteus was a domesticated chicken from a breed like this Malayan fowl, but was kept probably for cockfighting in those days. They are large, they are about 1 meter high. If they're standing next to your table, they can peck from your plate on your table. So they are tall birds.
They look really tall in the images there. It makes me wonder if it's no wonder people started to think, these are very different birds to what we're used to. It's no wonder folks started to think they're different.
It's absolutely understandable, and it's understandable from Temminck's point of view that he thought that it was something wild and new. But yeah, as I said before, the communication in those days and the information was not available, and for that reason, mistakes were made.
Yeah, no, you can completely understand, because of course a lot of it, as we said before, they had no access to genetic information. So a lot of this, you're basing this on I guess fairly superficial things that you can see. If it looks different, it's a new species.
Absolutely.
And it's like, well, actually, it wasn't always the case. So I'm just going to pause here for a second, Hein. We've got a few questions that have come in. Thanks very much, guys, for your questions. Do keep them coming. Let's take a few of these. So this one, a question from YouTube: is there any work from Darwin and his chickens that could be used to help speculate why some dinosaurs had feathers?
I don't know. I simply don't know. It's not my area. I personally think not, but I do not know the answer.
And I guess in Darwin's day, certainly knowledge of dinosaurs in Darwin's day was extremely limited, and they wouldn't have associated feathers and chickens with.
And of course, nowadays we know that birds are dinosaurs, but it's only accepted only a couple of years ago, accepted by the whole scientific world. And I was a little boy a long time ago. Of course, dinosaurs were reptiles, and birds are birds. And now we do know indeed that birds are in fact dinosaurs. But yeah, I don't have the answer on this question. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's fine. Question here is, what's in the collections from Temminck or Darwin? Is it birds or drawings?
We will come to that because the tailless jungle fowl is still present in the museum in the Netherlands. Darwin didn't know there was a specimen, so he thought Temminck was completely mad, but Temminck was not completely mad because he had 2 specimens. So he had based it on something. That foot, unfortunately, that was a real foot. That should be still in Leiden in the Netherlands, but at some point, as that always happened in the past in museums, and now we are more careful. It's probably thrown away because that foot does not exist anymore. There's only the drawing I just showed.
Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting to think that drawing is all we've got, so hold on to it. Another question that's come in from Facebook in relation to chickens: were they flying birds initially? And if yes, what made them lose this character, and when did they lose it? I guess, yeah, some of these giant chickens, I guess they can't fly, or if they do, they're not very elegant at it.
Let's say in that way that people think chickens can't fly. Depends a little bit on the breed. Jungle fowl flies very well. I don't say you can compare them with pigeons, but jungle fowl, just like pheasants, they fly. So they have not lost their flying capability at all. Lots of the breeds, indeed, because they are heavier than normal, or the frizzles and the silky fowl with the feathers, they can't fly at all. But yeah, chickens have not lost their flying ability, but only in some breeds because they became heavier and heavier.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's interesting to know that they can still do it. Some of them, if they're inclined to do.
Oh yeah, but as I said, the wild ancestor, just as pheasants. I mean, pheasants fly very well for miles and miles and very fast, and so do red jungle fowl if necessary.
Great. Thanks very much for your questions, guys. Now, there's one of the things that's come out when you dive into the story, there's a lot of confusion around the names of different things, and you've sort of touched on that a little bit. But why was there so much confusion around all these different birds that were apparently being discovered, and then we've subsequently found out, oh, that's not a new species at all? Why was that?
Again, the communication. There was no internet. There was no email. Of course, people wrote to each other, but you only wrote to somebody if you knew somebody or you knew what he had done. You wanted to know more about it. But if you didn't know, this nice image, but it's not too bad image of a green jungle fowl or Java jungle fowl, but it's a wild species. It's endemic to Java. Was described in, I forgot the date, 17 something, by an Englishman, and he called it the green pheasant, Phasianus varius. Now, nice, okay, new species indeed, for the first time described, published in an English book. That's it, you would think. If you go to the next photo, please. Years later, our friend Temminck got from connections on Java a few specimens. He had never seen that. He didn't know about the English book. This was new. Let's describe it. He described it as Gallus furcatus, the forktail. So, species already described earlier, described again as being new. Simple, because poor Temminck, he did not have internet. He didn't know the English guy who wrote it, who described it. So who could he know? And then a couple of years later, next photo, please. Sorry, this is not such a beautiful picture, but this is the specimen here in the collection. Same specimen from 3 views. This is what we call a type specimen. If the specimen used for the description of a new species is the type specimen, that is the specimen used, and we put a red label on it. That doesn't mean if you put a red label on it, it's a type specimen, but if it's a type specimen, you need to put on a red label. Green jungle fowl, Java jungle fowl. There was a guy called Horsfield. He got a few from Java, including this one. Hey, that's new. I've never seen that before. Let's describe that. He called it Gallus javanicus because it came from Java. So, same species described 3 times. As the rule goes, if the first name is according to all the rules we think it should do nowadays, so for nomenclature, then the first name stands. So in this case, the first name was, species name was varius. Okay, he called it Phasianus varius. Genus name has changed, so Java jungle fowl is nowadays called Gallus varius after the first name. And the name given by Temminck and the name given by Horsfield are synonyms, but not valid anymore. But yeah, no communication, so mistakes are made. The next photo, for example, shows a nice drawing, in this case, of another species that, according to Temminck, must have been something new. It was sent to him from, again, from Java, and never seen before. Yeah, it looks a bit like green jungle fowl, but no, certainly not. It looks a bit like red jungle. No, it's different. Let's describe it as a new species. So yeah, the species piled up. Problem for Darwin, because he constantly had to disprove that all those species, according to Temminck, had not contributed to the domesticated fowl. But this example, if you go to the next slide, is in fact a hybrid between green jungle fowl and red jungle fowl. Especially on Java, those hybrids are bred on purpose by the local people, but then they don't use a red jungle fowl, not a wild species, but they use a domesticated fowl, because the cockerels have a very typical crow voice. They call it singing. I said earlier, if you have one in your garden, your neighbors will not appreciate it as singing, and they will ask you to get rid of it as soon as possible because it is a horrible sound. But anyway, so yeah, those crossbreds were very common from Java.
You can completely see why it was so confusing for Darwin, with all these different names rattling around, and birds that look very different.
Indeed.
There's been an interesting question coming actually from YouTube from Eden, asking, when is the first chicken assumed to be domesticated? Do we know when that was? Because it feels like they've been domesticated for like forever, but there must be a point when we start.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't dare to come up with a date. And the problem is, when is something domesticated? How long does it have to be in captivity before it is domesticated? Does it have to develop different colors, mutations? I mean, mutations happen all the time. Think about blackbirds who suddenly, not suddenly, but you get youngsters sometimes, albinos. They're not domesticated. It's a mutation that occurs. Okay, albino is not a very good mutation to get in the wild. So the whole point when is something domesticated and when was something kept in captivity. And for many species, we nowadays consider they have more or less domesticated themselves. We did not
We
caught them
didn't
and
do
put
it
them in a
necessarily.
cage. They came to us, and they discovered that the protection from humans was great, and there was always some food. And the humans discovered, oh, that's easy. I don't have to go into the woods to find the eggs because they lay them under the bush next to my house. And so, yeah, it's difficult to say to give a date when it happened.
Yeah, no, good question though. But yeah, thanks for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Hein, we're just about out of time, but I want to finish up. I wonder if you could quickly answer the last question for me, which was Darwin able to actually prove that all these different chickens that we've seen today did actually come from a common ancestor?
In his mind, he was, and although he found some oddities in certain breeds, altogether he was of the opinion, and others with him, that indeed domesticated fowl came all from red jungle fowl. Nowadays, a few people would stand up and say, no, Darwin was wrong, because he have not proven with DNA there is some genome of gray jungle fowl, another wild species. That is, by the way, a nice skin that we have in the collection here. I have it here, by the way. What was thought to be Gallus giganteus, Darwin has seen this specimen and came to the conclusion that it's a domesticated fowl. Now, he was absolutely right. But yeah, back to was he right? Yes, he was right. And although modern chickens nowadays do have some genes from gray jungle fowl, especially to give them yellow legs and yellow skin, but let's face it, to get that gene into the population means you have to have only one sex with the neighbor, and the genes going into the population. That doesn't mean multiple ancestors. And also that foreign gene into a species, it will follow all the rules from the whole genome of that species. So a few odd genes from other species in domesticated chicken does not really mean that they had multiple ancestors. So yes, Darwin was absolutely right. It all came from the red jungle fowl. That enormous diversity is possible within one species, and if it is possible in domestication, it's also possible in the wild.
There you go. So he was able to prove it, and that was all without having any access to genetic science, which, you know, it brings me back to that point we talked about earlier about, I wonder if he had known a bit more about how genetics might work, if that would have influenced him at all. But we've run out of time, unfortunately, Hein, but thank you so much for chatting to us today and for sharing that story. I'm sure you've opened a lot of people's eyes to the variety of chickens that are out there. I'm sure people will look twice when they see one again. But thank you very much for joining us today, and all the best with the rest of your research.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you guys as well for watching, and thank you very much for your questions. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy it, as I said, please do consider helping us out. It's been a really tough year for the museum, so do feel free to make a small donation either next to the chat box on YouTube, or you can go onto the NHM website /donate. Please do have a look at that. But thank you so much for joining us today. Next week, we're going to be going into the world of fungi and exploring mushrooms and molds. So do join us then. But thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you again very soon.